So everybody, today I am reviewing this book called How to Be Sick by Toni Bernhard. You guys have heard me talk about this book quite a few times. Last month, for the month of May, I talked about this book. It was one of the first scopes I did for Lyme Awareness Month during the month of May. And I talked about this book and how this was a huge game changer for me in my struggles with chronic illness. For those of you that don't know, I have late stage Lyme disease, and I've been struggling with that for about a decade. But the last 5 years have been the worst. I have severe neurological issues as a result of my Lyme disease. So I'm completely disabled. I'm mostly homebound. I'm not in a wheelchair, but you know. Hi Manny, welcome. I'm not in a wheelchair, which is good, but I still have a lot of limitations. If you're curious about some of my limitations, you can check out some of the broadcasts that are saved here on my Periscope, and it'll talk to you about some of the weird neurological stuff that I have going. But I wanted to review this book because I feel that this book is the Bible for coping with a chronic illness. I swear by this book. And actually, Toni Bernhard just came out with another book called How to Live Well with Chronic Pain and Illness. And so far, I've read this much, and I'm already liking this. I would say probably more than the original. But I'm going to review this one first. I'll try to review this one next week because I want to sort of do two back-to-back reviews from the same author because these books touch on the same topic. So who is Toni Bernhard? Toni Bernhard, she received her Juris Doctorate from UC Davis and was part of the faculty for 22 years, 6 as the Dean of Students. In 2001, she went on a trip to Paris with her husband. And from that point on, she started having really bad chronic fatigue and chronic pain issues. She doesn't know. Hi, Arkimble, welcome. She doesn't really know what happened. She just knows that somewhere along during that trip, she doesn't know if it was the plane over to Paris or while she was in Paris, but once she got to Paris, she started having this severe fatigue, and I believe she has pain as well, and ever since 2001, she's been suffering with this. So she's had this for about 15 years. She was a student of Buddhism for many, many years prior to getting sick. And she said once she got sick, all of those Buddhist practices went out the window. And she said, it's bizarre because here I was, this student of Buddhism for so many years, and suddenly when I needed these skills, they all went out the window, and I stopped. I just forgot about all of that. And she just kind of went into the spiral of despair over this mysterious health issue that she, couldn't resolve. So she's a typical chronic illness story, going from doctor to doctor to doctor, not getting any answers, trying this treatment, trying that treatment, getting a little bit better, and then kind of going back to being sick. So she's been through it all. I consider her the guru of coping with chronic illness. This book, I would say, goes under probably a self-help book. It's not really so much psychology as it is just a self-help book. She doesn't use a lot of psychological terms. She's not a psychologist. She's just a sick person like the rest of us, and she was a student of Buddhism. I wouldn't say that this book is really religious either, but it does talk a lot about different Buddhist practices. So the book says it's a Buddhist-inspired guide for the chronically ill and their caregivers. So you are going to find some Buddhist terminology and Buddhist-type practices in this book. But it's not, I think we talked about this the other day, it's not this weird hippy-dippy. She makes it very, very accessible for those of us that aren't knowledgeable about Buddhism. She makes it very accessible for us. So she puts it in plain English. She's not going to give you all these weird terms. she incorporates Buddhist teachings and practices into coping skills. So she kind of takes the Buddhist practices and applies them to how to cope with a chronic illness or people suffering from chronic pain or any kind of long-term issue. So she's very good at putting that into plain English. I'm trying to look here. I didn't really prep too much for this book review. So this is the reason why she wrote this book. I'm going to read this because I think this really sums it up really well. She says, I've written How to Be Sick to help and inspire the chronically ill and their caregivers as they meet the challenges posed by any chronic illness or condition, including coping with symptoms that just won't go away, coming to terms with a more isolated life, weathering fear about the future, facing the misunderstanding of others, dealing with the healthcare system, and for spouses, partners, or other caregivers, adapting to so many unexpected and sometimes sudden life changes. So this book is not just for people that are sick, it's also for their caregivers, for the people that are taking care of us. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to convince anybody in my family to read this, but it is very, very good to help the people that are not sick understand what it's like to be sick. And a lot of these coping practices can also apply to them so that they can better cope with their loved one's chronic illness. She does include a narrative of her own struggle in this book, and she does include a lot of examples from her own life. So the story that I told you at the beginning of this review of how she went to Paris, she talks about that. And she talks about, different incidents when she's, had to deal with doctors or had to deal with family stuff, and what practices she used to get her through that. But she does use a lot of stories from her own life in this book. She does demonstrate when she uses the practices that she describes and why she uses them. Like what triggered her to use that specific practice. It is a story plus a self-help book. So there is a bit of narrative in there talking about, this is what happened. I went to this doctor and, this doctor couldn't help me with this. But the focus of the book is the Buddhist practices, and how she came about to start incorporating those Buddhist practices for chronic illness. So this is sort of like a prequel to this other book, because this book so far is talking more about the practices, whereas this book, she's introducing you to the practices and to why she started using them, and how she started applying them to her own chronic illness. Like I said, she uses regular English. She does quote a lot of Buddhist philosophy and terminology, which can be a little off-putting if you're not into that. So she uses terms like Tonglen. I think there's like a term called Tonglen. I'm trying to think. She does use some terminology. She does name a lot of Buddhist teachers. Bhante Gunaratana, Thich Nhat Hanh, which is a big Buddhist teacher. So she does kind of get into the nitty-gritty of Buddhism in some parts. Dhammapada, with our thoughts we make the world. So she does use Buddhist terminology. She tells you what it means, but she does use that in this book. So if you're not really into that, it might be a little off-putting, but I think she does a really good job of making it accessible. She does explain Buddhist philosophy. So she will tell you, this Buddhist practice or Buddhism is basically centered on, hi Spike, how are you? Buddhist practice is centered on the fact that suffering does not come from the fact that you're sick or the fact that you're in pain. Suffering comes from your desire not to be sick and not to be in pain. So that's a huge Buddhist philosophy. Thank you for the hearts. So she does tell you a lot of Buddhist fundamental Buddhist guidelines in here. But she does provide exercises to use during times of stress. Hi, AK-47. So, this book, I think you guys might have seen my review last week of the DBT book. The DBT book has worksheets and things to fill out. This book does not have that, but she does give you step-by-step like rules to follow and guidelines for each practice. It's not necessarily spelled out in a way that, like, for example, it's not divided by, it's not going to say exercise number 1 up here or practice number 1. She just kind of incorporates it into into the different chapters that she's defined. So one section is accepting pain, another one is finding joy and love, another one is turnarounds and transformations. So she just divided it in her own way. So it's not really as defined as the DBT book. So it's a lot more fluid. You kind of have to look through the book to find the practice, and you sort of have to read it, and she guides you through it. But she doesn't really have like a blank page where you fill in the blanks to each thing. If you want to do it yourself, you get out your own piece of paper and just follow her directions. So it's still good though. It's still really good. And I kind of have a feeling that this was sort of like I said, it's her introductory to this book. I think she sort of refined this book with this one. So this is sort of like an intro. And so I don't think she did a very great job. The book is really, really good regardless. But I think it was sort of her first attempt at applying Buddhist practices to chronic pain and chronic illness. And so I think she's sort of slowly refining that in the books that she writes afterwards. This is definitely targeted towards people with chronic health issues. It was written specifically for that audience. So last week with the DBT book, that book was written for people that have specific mental health issues, but I applied that book to chronic illness. This book was specifically written for people that have chronic health issues. So if you have any long-term ongoing chronic health problem, this book was written specifically for you. So she's definitely going to talk to you about her struggles with chronic illness. It's very relatable. When I was reading this book, I definitely related to her struggle going from doctor to doctor to doctor, not getting answers, spiraling because a doctor is not telling you anything, or because the doctor just really doesn't want to deal with you anymore. So I found it to be very, very relatable. Her story with chronic illness is a universal story for any of us that have chronic pain or chronic health issues, especially those of us that are struggling to look for an answer. So she's got a very universal story. So like I've told you guys before, I don't just talk the talk, I walk the walk. So I tried some of these exercises when I'm having issues, when I'm spiraling. I take this book out and I take a look at it. The same way that I did with the DBT book, I take this book out and I start doing the exercises. One of the exercises that I found really, really interesting was something called inquiry practice. So let me see if I can find it in the book. But basically, this practice asks you to question what you're feeling in that moment. So basically, say for example, like I had one occasion when I was invited to a birthday party of a friend's, and I knew I couldn't go because I have light sensitivity issues, and it was going to be an indoor party. So I knew that I wasn't going to be able to go, and I was kind of sad. And so she tells you to start asking yourself, really, are your feelings really true? Are they really realistic, or are you just sort of telling yourself that you're unhappy about this. So she asks you to question your own thoughts. So so basically this practice is used to put your thoughts into perspective. So for example, I really want to go to my friend's party. Is that true? Yes, it is true. I really do want to go to my friend's birthday party. Now, then she asks you to say, is it absolutely, absolutely true that you want to go? And that's when you start asking yourself, maybe I don't want to go. I mean, I do want to go, but maybe there's a little part of me that doesn't really want to go. So what you're feeling is not the absolute truth. You start to question whether what you're feeling, because sometimes we say, no, I want to go, I want to go, I want to go. And because I can't go, I'm angry and I'm mad and I'm sad because I can't go. But then you really start to ask yourself, what would happen if you went? So she tells you to basically take that thought away. Who would you be without that thought? If I stopped thinking, I want to go. If I didn't have that thought, I wouldn't be unhappy. It's the thought that makes me unhappy, not the actual fact that I can't go. It's your thoughts telling yourself, I'm missing out on this, that's why I'm unhappy. And then she asks you to turn it around. So basically your initial statement of saying, I really want to go to this party, I really wanted to go, I'm so mad that I can't go, she tells you to turn it around and then say, well, I don't want to go to this party. Why don't you want to go to this party? Well, I don't want to go because I'm probably going to feel sick. I don't want to go because the lights are going to bother me. I don't want to go because, I have to drive really far to get to this party. So then you start to see the reasons why you probably don't want to go, or you probably shouldn't go. And it starts to sort of make you feel better in the sense that it puts things into perspective that, hey, it probably isn't the best idea for you to go to this party. And it also, paints a picture, that you weren't seeing before. For example, if I don't go to this party, my friend's going to be mad at me. But then you put things into perspective and you think, okay, he's not going to be mad at me. I don't think he's really even going to care, to be honest. So, she asks you to turn things around and to see it from the other side. And she says working on the turnaround led to 2 other unexpected insights. So it makes you realize, hi Miguel, it makes you realize other things that you weren't, because you were so focused and hell-bent on the fact that you wanted to go to this party, you couldn't see all these other reasons why you probably shouldn't go, or why you probably don't want to go. So she says that it just brings more insight to you. Well, she uses her own example here, but that was my example that I've used. I've been sick for about 10 years, but the last 5 have been the worst. The last 5 I've started developing really severe neurological issues. So I do use those exercises and those practices. Another thing that she tells her readers is to also have compassion. And this was one of the biggest things that was missing for me. For some of you that were with me in May, I have not tried hydrogen peroxide therapy, although I've heard of it, and I have mixed feelings about it. But I've tried a lot of things, and at this point, I'm kind of just trying to take a break from stuff. But for those of you that were following me through the month of May, when I was doing a scope every single day, I talked about how, my family had very, very high expectations for me. I was the first one to go to college. 3% food grade hydrogen peroxide. Okay. My family had the bar set really, really high for me because I was the first one to go to college. Hi, King Kello. So, I put that pressure on myself as well. I had to be this perfect, hardworking, very, very successful individual. Hi, how are you? And I really set the bar very, very high. At one point, during a time when I was in a lot of pain, I was working 12-hour days. Thank you for inviting followers. I was working 12-hour days and pushing myself and pushing myself and pushing myself. And that, I'm doing okay. That eventually led me to get even more sick. And one of the biggest things that Toni talks about in this book is that you need to have compassion for yourself. And she tells you that having compassion for yourself can actually alleviate suffering. And this was something that was just a totally new, mind-blowing concept for me, because I was not accustomed to anybody having compassion for me, much less myself. I think I was probably the least compassionate person to me. And she says, you need to start having compassion for yourself. And so she has practices that are directed at or for directing compassion towards yourself. Sometimes just telling yourself, my knees hurt, and saying, my poor knees, my knees have carried me for whatever, 30 years. These knees have taken me through whatever, through numerous jobs, or on walks and on this and that, and my knees deserve a rest, or my knees deserve to have my compassion and my poor knees. And she even tells you to stroke your knees, or to just be very compassionate. And I know some of this is going to be kind of woo-woo out there kind of stuff, but for those of us that have never really had that level of compassion for ourselves, or have received that kind of compassion from anybody else, this is something that can be really effective for you. And from that practice, I started realizing that, you don't choose to be sick. I did not choose this illness. This illness chose me. It happened to me. I did not bring it upon myself. And so why am I punishing myself for something that I didn't cause? And, it was a very eye-opening thing to realize that, and to think, oh my God, it's not my fault. Even if some people make you feel like it is, it isn't. And therefore you should have compassion for yourself. And I've noticed this with other people that I've met that have chronic health issues, people that continue to push themselves. I have an uncle who's been chronically ill for many years after he had cancer, and he just has the bar held very high for himself. He has his own business now, and he's angry because he can't be at that business every day, and sometimes he just has to be at home. And it wouldn't be so bad if he had a little bit of compassion for himself. And I was the same way. I was very angry that I could no longer work. I was very angry that I could no longer, watch TV or watch movies, or, go out partying like I used to. And then finally I told myself, hey, you have a right to be sick. You have a right to relax and to rest, and to just, cut yourself some slack. And when I started telling myself that, I noticed that I stopped being so unhappy and so angry about the fact that I was sick. And, I just turned it around. And that, I think that's the biggest takeaway from this book, is just having compassion for yourself, and not holding the bar so high, because you're sick. And Toni did that for herself as well. She continued to teach even though she was sick. She would just teach from a chair. She would sit down and teach her classes from a chair, and and eventually she realized, I can't do this anymore. And on top of that, it was making her even more sick. So, like I said, I don't just talk, I walk. I practice what I preach. I'm doing what these books are telling me to do. And I'm telling you, it does help. It really does help. And she also tells you other things. She does give you tips on how to, yes, I do what I say, exactly. She gives you also tips on communication and how to communicate about your illness to other people. She said that at one point she was very obsessed with the illness and talking about it and finding solutions, and that started driving people away. And she realized that there's a time and a place and a certain way to speak about your illness. And so she learned to do that, and that sort of improved her relationships with everyone. And so that's something that I kind of already sort of had a handle on, But I've seen this with other people that have chronic health issues, that they talk and talk and talk and obsess, and they go down this rabbit hole of their illness, and it drives people away. And you cannot just drown yourself in your illness. You still have all these other aspects of your life that are still going, and you can't just neglect everything because you have this illness. And that's what I really like, is that she does give you practical tips on how to talk about your illness. Like I said, my least favorite thing about this book is that it doesn't really have worksheets, and the breakdowns of the exercises are very fluid. The exercise that I just told you guys about the turnarounds and stuff, she just describes it like in paragraphs. She doesn't really break it down. She says step 1, step 2, step 3, but it's all in paragraphs, so it's not very well defined. Let me see if I could find it again. So basically it's just like step 1 is this, this, and this. Step 2 is this, this, and this. And she doesn't really separate it out so that you can clearly see it. That's why I kind of have a hard time finding them in the book, because they're not, they don't really stand out. And she doesn't really have the page number to each exercise. So here we go. See, it says inquiry practice, and then she just describes the inquiry practice in paragraph form. All the steps are in there, but they're just in the paragraphs. There's no bold letters that say step 1, step 2, step 3. And I kind of didn't like that, because, like I said, when I have to look for it in the book, I have a really hard time doing it. And I usually put sticky notes. Like in this book, I have sticky notes. But I didn't do it with this one because I'm not prepared, I guess. But that was sort of kind of off-putting. And the fact that she doesn't really have the worksheets. And the only reason I say this is because I read the DBT book last week. And I really, really like the fact that the DBT book broke it down into worksheets and broke it down step by step. It even gives you narratives. It italicizes things. This book does not do that. This book does not really, she only italicizes like titles and stuff like that. So that was sort of my least favorite thing about the book. I feel almost like her next book should be a workbook with worksheets and blank spaces to fill in and things that can be photocopied. So I don't know, maybe I should give her that suggestion, because for those of us that are sick, that have, we live in brain fog. Like I've been having a lot of brain fog lately. I've been having a lot of pain and sort of like a feeling like I'm disoriented. I really need things to be spelled out for me. I need to see worksheets. I need to see italics. I need everything to be very clearly defined for me. And unfortunately, this book isn't like that. It's more of a narrative, more of a story, but it does break things down, but it's all kind of just fluid. It all kind of runs in together. So I kind of wish that it was a little bit more well-defined. So far, I feel like the second book, this one is doing it a little bit better. But I'm not completely finished with this book, so I can't really say just yet. But it does seem to be broken down a little bit better. It's still a very helpful book, though. I still highly recommend it. My overall feeling about this book is that it's great, especially if you have a chronic illness. And the thing that I like about it is that it was written by someone that has a chronic health issue, and that her illness has not resolved. She is still sick to this day. So she's been sick since 2001. That's 15 years. So she is not just blowing smoke. She is an actual, real sick person. And she has a family. She's married. She has kids. She has grandkids. Hi, Vincent. Welcome. She has an entire life. So this isn't just some person, some hermit that is not, that doesn't have an actual life. She had a career before she got sick. She had a marriage. She still has that same marriage. She has kids. She has grandkids. She has an entire life. So this book is written by someone that has all of the struggles that any chronically ill person has. So it's not, written by a Buddhist teacher that is actually healthy. It's written by someone that has health issues and is struggling. So, you know, she's a credible source. Like I said, she makes Buddhist teachings very accessible, and she applies the coping skills. She gives you examples from her own life. She tells you this is what happened and this is the practice that I used. So she can give you concrete examples. She's not just saying, well, you know, turn it around, turn that thought, you know, the other way or something. And she's also another person, you know, and I talked about this last month. It's not just about thinking positive. She will tell you there are times when you just can't think positively. And that's what I like. That she's not just one of these people that's like, oh, you know, just smile, fake it till you make it. She tells you that doesn't work. It does not work to fake it. You're not going to get anywhere by pretending to be healthy. If anything, it's going to make you even more sick. So she's a realist. She is realistic about having a chronic illness. Like I said, this book was a game changer for me. It was a big time game changer. It changed my perspective on my illness. It actually changed my perspective on life as a whole. I don't look at my life the way that I did before. To be honest, before I got really, really sick, I was probably 10 times more miserable than I am now. I was just a very miserable, unhappy, angry person. And my illness, as well as all the stuff that I've learned along the way, have changed that for me. And this book, like I said, this book will change a lot of your perspective on your own illness and even on your life before the illness. It also led me to a greater acceptance of myself. For anybody that struggles with accepting yourself the way that you are, if you struggle with feelings of hating yourself, of feeling inadequate, of feeling like a failure, this book can also help you because it does teach you to have compassion for yourself. Thank you for the hearts, by the way. So it's good not just for sick people, but it is specifically written for sick people. Like I said, I really recommend this book. It was a game changer for me. Hopefully I'll be done with the second book by next week, so I can kind of do a review of this one and then maybe a comparison. And hopefully I'll have that down by next week, but I highly recommend it. And this book it's not a long book. It does have a lot of material in it, but it's not that thick. The second book is actually thicker than this one. Not that thick, very easy to read. It's written in plain English. It's interesting. It really is interesting. I think I reviewed Bite Me by Ali Hilfiger last week. That was the book that I reviewed last week, and that one did not draw me in. And you guys saw my review where I felt, next week we have lunch, okay. That book did not draw me in. This book does draw me in. It's very interesting, and especially if you are into Buddhism, I definitely recommend this if you're really into Buddhism and stuff like that. But it does draw you in. It's very interesting. She's an educated woman. She definitely knows how to write, that was my letdown last week with Ali Hilfiger's book, is that she doesn't really know how to write very well. And like I said, that may or may not be her fault. But both of these writers, Ali Hilfiger and Toni Bernhard, they both have a chronic illness. So I just think that writing comes naturally and much better to some people. And she was a university professor, so she's accustomed to writing and having a way with words. So she's very, very good here. She uses quotes from Buddhist philosophy. I love quotes. Nothing whatsoever should be clung to. Buddha Dasa Bhikkhu. So she has all these Buddhist teachers. You can tell that she does know what she's talking about. She is a student of Buddhism. She's not just saying like, oh, I'm casually into Buddhism. She does know in depth about Buddhist practices. So like I said, highly recommend it. Hi, Joey. This is a book that I consider the Bible for the chronically ill. Definitely get it. Read it. Have it on your shelf. Have it accessible to you for whenever you need it, because this is definitely going to get you through some rough times. So that's my review. that's all I have to say about the book, is just get it. If you're sick, get it. If you're not sick, it's still interesting. If you're interested in Buddhism, get it. I cannot say enough about this book. I love it. So thank you guys for joining me. Thank you for the hearts. Thank you for the shares and the follows. Check out my links in my bio. There's a link to my YouTube page where you'll find all of my Periscope replays from last month and my book reviews. And you will also find Don't Leave Me. There's also a link to my You Caring fundraising page. My fundraising ended at the end of May last month, but there's still information about my illness. I get more in depth on my You Caring page if you want to read what it says there, because a lot of people come in and they ask me questions and they're like, what do you have? What's wrong with you? And sometimes it's hard to explain it, so it is written there. You can also check out my other Periscope broadcasts that I have saved on here. And on my YouTube page, they tell you more about my illness and what's going on with me. And I also have a link to my blog. I have a blog where I just take pictures and stuff. It's not really that interesting, but you can go and take a look at it if you want. And also follow me on Twitter. I'm HotSun100384, and that's where I will be announcing which books I'm going to review and when I'm Periscoping. Hi, Arab Blue. So thank you guys for joining me. Thank you for the hearts. Thank you for everything. I really appreciate it when you guys come in. Okay, Joey Casino. Cool, cool. So you guys can catch all of my replays on YouTube and all my book reviews. So thank you for joining me. I'll be back next Thursday, or maybe before then, with just a little broadcast here and there. And I will see you then. Thanks, guys.